I was so looking forward to this conversation because I'm just fascinated about topic of life and what can we do to actually recreate our lives, expand it in a profound way. And it's exactly what you teach us in your recent book, The Three Conditions. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Karina, for having me.
Of course. And as I mentioned, your book, The Three Conditions, I know that you say that intention, joy, and certainty, it's how we actually can get to that place of expansion and recreate our life and start living the life we actually want to live. How did you come up with those three conditions and you happen to know that's the case?
Yeah. Well, I think the way that it came up through me or for me came from a combination of my own personal experience as well as, the vast amount of wisdom I'd kind of put myself in front of over a number of years. But at some point, it dawned on me that when you really oversimplify all of reality, what we're really left with is the way that we perceive ourselves and the way that we perceive everything else, right? If you make the world extremely dual, right? Even though I ultimately believe that we're living in a cosmic unity, but we perceive things as duality. That's the starting point for all conversation and personal transformation and spiritualities. The starting point is that there's a me, and then there's everything else, which includes everyone else and every experience that takes place. And the way that I see those two elements, the self and then everything else, if I can see it and come into alignment with the nature of what it is, which at the depth, when you pull away all thought, you're left with something that's pure and essential and good. So if I can relate to my essential goodness and the essential goodness of reality, so what I'm left with is the experience of peace and joy, because I've removed all of my ego oriented negative perceptions that I project onto either my self concept or onto the world. So when I call them the three conditions, intention is really about aligning with our soul intention for life. For who are we, and what are we doing here? And it's reconnecting to the essential goodness that is the nature of the human self. Certainty is about how we experience that which is happening around us, to us, for us, with us, in this experience that we call life. And again, the certainty is aligning with a goodness of a process, that life is unfolding not randomly or chaotically, but there is some order to this totality that we have. And so when you come back and you align with those two places, what you're left with is the experience of peace and joy, which is there naturally before we kind of paint our picture over everything. I think the beginning of everything is awareness, meaning our the time that we give ourselves to become aware of our thinking, of our paradigms, of our beliefs, how we're seeing the world. How you see is more important than what you see, right? The way that you look at what's taking place is is primary to what's actually taking place, because that's your whole experience is going to come as a result of how you're seeing the world. So the beginning of everything is awareness, is actually spending time in your life recognizing that there's an entire system that's taking place in terms of judgment and uh, not really being objective in this world. We go through life with a heavy amount of subjectivity where we're projecting thoughts and ideas onto situations, onto ourselves. So that's one of the reasons why meditation is such a powerful practice. It's an opportunity to sit there and just get still and see what's happening, feel the present moment, feel the sensations in the body, and see them for what they are without judging them for being one way or another. Spending time in your emotional space, spending time in your intellectual space, just seeing the thoughts show up and then dissipate and move away. The more we create and cultivate this sense of just general awareness inside, we're returning to that natural sense of self.
Do you think that myself as a person and the world around me is one thing? Does it mean that I create and attract all the experiences that I have and pretty much I'm in control or responsible for the life that I live?
I heard a couple different questions in there, but I think if I were to zone in what I think you're asking is the life that I'm experiencing a product of my thoughts? Is that the
Yes.
question that you're asking? So
Yes.
I think to a degree, right? It's like it's a bit of a yes and a no. On some level, what you think about does expand. Your general sense of self, your energy, your vibrational frequency, all of that has an impact in the life that you experience. And we're magnetic, we're electric, right? That we are energetic. That's our being, and so we come into certain alignments that draw certain individuals, situations, circumstances into our life through what we might call the law of resonance. People have called it the law of attraction, all whatever you want to call this law of nature that's built into reality. That's true, but I don't think we can take it so far to say that everything you think about is directly showing up in your experience, right? Not every single person who thought to become the president becomes the president, right? Not every single person who thinks to become a billionaire becomes a billionaire. And not every person who thinks to become a spiritual teacher becomes a spiritual teacher. But we can have those thoughts and they impact the life we live, right? So they're a part of it. And if you give something enough energy, it certainly has an impact in our reality. More important than the thoughts you think is the state of consciousness you have, because that's the part of you that is communicating with the universe, right? It's communicating on a subconscious level, on a subatomic level, on a quantum level, beyond the sensory, almost the surface layer of reality. So that to me is always going to be more important than just the thoughts that are happening on the inside. The thoughts are part of it, and the thoughts might help bring you to a certain state of consciousness.
When we communicate with the universe on the subconscious level, are we talking about our inner voice that we experience through life when it's like we're about to make a decision and we have this feeling inside, like if we should go this direction or not, or there is some different way to connect to the
Yeah,
universe?
I think there's two. There's guidance from within, and then there's guidance from without. So, guidance from within is when we are tuned in to something deeper in reality, and we call it intuition. You might call it a psychic sense, a sixth sense, where you feel guided and called to something that shows up inside of you. And it sometimes there's rhyme and reason behind it, and sometimes you can point to logic, and sometimes it's beyond logic and it transcends reason, and yet you're called to it, and there's an understanding that you have with reality. At the same time, there are other elements in terms of communication with reality, which is when you're having synchronistic events showing up in your life. You're seeing certain people or ideas or numbers or words showing up over and over again in your experience. And so those are communications from the outside in, but again, it requires someone who's paying attention and picking up on that nuance to even have that communication. But then once we look, if we just put down intuition and synchronicity just for a moment, all of life is really a communication with the universe or with God, I'd like to say, right? All of life is a dialogue. It's you having this conversation with reality. That's all of life is the
Mhm.
conversation. There's no moment that one is not in conversation. It's the reason why King David says, I am prayer, because he was saying that his essence was a dialogue with God, that his entire experience, the whole life, everything as it unfolded. And the question is just how conscious of it are we as we're going through it, but not whether or not it's happening. It is what it is. It's happening whether or not we're conscious of it. Someone recently asked me, how do I know what the message is? How do I interpret the messages in my life?
Yeah.
And I think part of the answer to that question is you never really know. I mean, there's no textbook for that. But if you have an intuitive understanding, if you see something enough times and then inside of you it feels a certain way, and not in an emotional feeling, but a almost like a sense, it feels like an interpretation. It feels, somebody was telling me that he kept seeing certain um, words in different places that reminded him of his father, and he kept seeing it over and over again, and he felt that the message meant something to the effect of he needed to go do something special for his father. no one can tell you that's a right or wrong. But if that's what came to you through that process, I would trust your intuition more than I would sit there and try to logically break down, what this might mean. We're dealing, as soon as we're moving to that space and we're having a conversation around energy and synchronicity and intuition, we're already speaking beyond logic, right? It doesn't mean that if you have a thought or an impulse, that just because you had the thought or impulse you run after it. I like to say, you lead with your gut but you check with your mind. Right? That we have a mind on purpose. So if you have a gut instinct, if you have an intuition, your heart is leading you in some place, but in your mind it's so far away from rational. Maybe it's dangerous for you or someone else, or maybe it puts you in a precarious position. So that's the opportunity to think about it and say, okay, well, now let me consider, is this an intuition that I feel so passionately about that I want to pursue and see what takes place on the other side? Or is this one of those where I say, okay, well, let me see what else comes through along the way before I make such a big decision? So we're leading with our hearts, but we're checking with our minds. That's the purpose of the brain.
What about ego? Sometimes it's difficult to differentiate between your intuition, inner voice, and ego.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's exactly part of what I was saying before, which is that sometimes it's ego, and therefore we have to sit and, bring our rational mind into the situation and think, is this really the right thing for me or for the people that I'm with, for the relationships that I have? Life is longer than the moment, right? On the one hand, the moment is all that exists. It's our entire experience is happening in the now. On the other hand, we plan as if we'll live. We have to live as if we'll die, but we have to plan as if we'll live. And so life has time, conceptually, that we have to know that, if you do want to get somewhere by a certain time, you have to leave at a certain time in the day to get there. So we're always playing. It's a dance between our mind and our heart. As far as ego is concerned, it really depends on the situation. But one of the ways to check is to ask yourself, how would you feel if you didn't get that thing? And if the answer is you would be, angry, frustrated, upset, sad, depressed, if all, so you can know to the degree that it would anger you or upset you, or cause a level of grief or sadness, that there's more ego invested in that decision, right?
But then, can we do something to get rid of ego like once and for all, or it's always there and it will keep torturing us, doubting ourselves, our decisions? And I mean, like, what's the purpose of ego? Like, to learn lessons, to teach us something, but then at some point it should stop, no?
Yeah. So the way that I understand ego is essentially it's the attachment or the need behind our desire or our opinion, right? It's an attachment to our personal opinions, an attachment to certain thoughts that we have, thought forms that take place inside, and they form a self concept that is separate from our essential self, which is consciousness, essentially, right? Beyond any version of attachment. And so, we come into this world, and by nature of our human bodies and the lives that we're brought up in, we get a sense that we're separate from everyone and everything. So we start in this sense of separateness. Going down that road, that thought form of separateness, we eventually realize in that space, right, that there is a lack. So the ego is born from a sense of separateness and lack in this world. And so in order to fill that gap and to close the space between separateness and what we want to be connected to, so our lives start looking outwards. We look out into the world trying to fill that space inside. And so the ego's developed from there. Now, it's not all bad. I know the ego gets a really bad rap sometimes. We need it, right? Because we are material. In this world, we are material. We do have bodies. And in this world, you do need to eat. The body
Mhm.
needs to eat to live, right? And
Yeah.
the body needs a partner to procreate, and the body needs, I mean, there's a lot of things that the body itself does need. We need to have names and a separate sense of identity in order to have communities and relationships and connections. That's part of this world. In fact, it's part of the fun of this world is the ego, that we have these separate sense of self. The question is, how much is it dominating your experience? And so the answer to your question was, does it ever fully go away? Well, you wouldn't ever really want it to fully go away, because if it were to fully go away, you would cease to be, right? You as in as the human part of a human being. Your being will always be there, but the human part of who you are is connected to the ego. You would just rather it be significantly more subtle. You would rather it not be in control of your mind, and have these high levels of attachment. And maybe there are very, very select few individuals who walk this world who have completely transcended the idea of ego. And it is possible. I'd have to really sit and consider whether or not even the the biggest spiritual leaders and teachers throughout history, if they really ever fully transcended ego. But I don't know if that's even a goal. I don't know if the goal is to transcend it so much that you now don't have any sense of humanness to your human experience. So we do want it there, but we don't want it to be the dominant force in our lives to the degree that we're walking around unconscious and just living out the program that was handed to us, either from our parents or from our societies or from what we assume to be true based on our experience, and then we just live as a reflection of that programming. Um, that would be a spiritual death, to go through life and to never have the opportunity to go and see what's on the other side.
You actually made me think differently about ego now. Before, I was always looking at it negatively, that it doesn't have any purpose except just torturing our minds. But now you're right. If, let's say, you're awakened to the point that you know things beyond this material world, you don't have ego, then you know all of this. And what's the purpose of just being in this material world if you know far beyond it? So I guess I, yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
it's a
it's more
different
about
experience.
elevating and refining the ego is I think an even higher spiritual pursuit than just trying to destroy it altogether. Right? So there's a way where your ego is acting in alignment with a higher truth. But it's almost like, if you were to think about, we talk about the present moment and the importance of being here, being now. This is all of reality is really taking place in this exact space, in this exact moment. And that's where the flow of life is. And at the same time, we can't ignore the fact that we need the memories of the past to inform our decisions for the future. And we need to have plans for where we're going. Otherwise, we can't function in this world. So people ask me all the time, if I completely give myself over to the present moment, how do I live my life? I'll just spend all my money in any given moment, because who cares about tomorrow, right? Seize the day, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. And it's not about only being in the moment, only being now, but it's about prioritizing and leaning into the moment in a way that's dominant, in a way that is taking up the essence of your attention and of your focus and of your consciousness. But of course, in the periphery, we're aware that there's a future and we're aware that there's a past. So I would say the same thing with the ego. It's, well, predominantly, we want to be sitting in the seat of consciousness and sitting in the seat of our soul and seeing things through a lens of purity and clarity and goodness and love and creativity and joy and peace. And that's where we want to be. And on the periphery, we're aware of the fact that when someone says, "Hi, nice to meet you," you say Karina, you don't say, "I'm consciousness." You still have to have a name to respond to someone. And when they say, "What do?" You can still say, "I do this job," while I'm walking through this world. And when they say, "Where do you live?" The response is, New York, or in my case, outside of Jerusalem. It's not in,
In the
there
universe.
is no space in the universe, right? So we want to be experiencing the world predominantly through the lens of a higher consciousness, while being peripherally aware of what's actually happening here on the surface.
Do you think we all at some point going to this awakening or enlightening process of rediscovering who we are and connecting with our true self, or it's not for everybody? And the reason I ask, because I know you started your career in the entertainment industry and then you profoundly changed your life.
That's right. So there's a line somewhere towards the beginning of the book, A Course in Miracles. I don't remember
I
the
love
exact.
that one. I love this.
Yeah, it says something to the effect of, um, "This course is a course for everyone. You have no choice whether or not you take this course. You only have a choice as to when you take the course." Right, and it's referring to uh, this process of awakening and coming to a deeper consciousness about reality. And so, seen from that perspective, I think what the idea is, and I agree with it, is that along the way, we're all in a process of growth and awakening. Life is a spiritual evolution, and that's what we've been doing since the beginning of time. It doesn't mean it's going to happen for everyone in this lifetime, right? You might be going through and developing a number of lessons in this lifetime that serves a future lifetime, or that serves humanity in another way. So we're all in that process and we're all in that journey. I don't know if everyone is going to be there. Now, it happens to be the way, not that it matters, but the way that I see and perceive things, it looks like we're in a great awakening right now. And throughout history, there are points, there are like critical points along the way where there's more awakening happening on the planet at any given time. And it appears that we are in one of those spaces right now where more people are open uh, to the moreness of life, to the depth of life, to the inside of life than there were before. So we might see a significantly higher ratio of individuals who are touching awakening. It might not happen for everyone in this lifetime, but I think that as a collective, we are moving in that direction.
Speaking about lessons, what if we keep experiencing the same things, the same lessons, but we don't learn them? What happens next?
Until you get something, the universe will provide you ample opportunities to learn that lesson, right? If you're an individual who's overly empathetic and you're really really nice, and maybe you're a people pleaser, so you're going to end up in situations over and over again where you have to learn to stand in your own body and to show a level of confidence without having to bend your will to another, meaning that that will be a lesson that shows up over and over. And the same would be true for the opposite. If you're a person who's maybe a bit narcissistic and you always think you're right, so you're going to be pushed in situations where you're going to be forced to see that you're not always going to be right. Right. So depending on where you fall on kind of the life spectrum, there are going to be certain lessons that show up over and over for you, partially because there's a spiritual plan for our reality, but on the other side, just by the nature of this world, if you lean a certain way, so every time you bump up against reality, so your particular bend is going to feel it in that space until you kind of shave off, or align, maybe is a better language, back into a space which is in more harmony with life.
When we come to this life, do we choose what lessons we will learn?
We're co-creators in this universe, and there is a piece in the Talmud that in Kabbalah is explained as exactly seeing it this way, which is that before we come to this world, we're given kind of the major arc of what this life plan is supposed to look like and how we're going to grow and develop in that space. And it's almost like, we double click on it and say, yes, that's the path that I want to go down this time, or this is the lesson that I want to learn this time. So I think the simple answer is yes, we do have a hand in what we experience. I don't know if it means that we have we choose all the different specific elements of what happens along the way, but it could be that overarching archetypes of life, we have a hand in. That would be the wrong way to say it, because I think we choose it before we have a hand.
I'm curious about the concept and experience of deja vu because for me, recently, especially for the last, I would say 6 months, I experience it constantly, almost every single day. Like something happens, and right at that second, I'm like, well, it happened before, or it feels so familiar. Or I meet someone and I feel that I've met that person before, even though clearly we've never met.
So I think again, there's 2 points here. One of them is quite deep, and for the sake of time, again, to oversimplify, we look at time as linear, and so the next moment's going to show up in the next moment. But there is an element of reality that the entire thing has already happened, right? All of reality and every possibility of experience has already taken place. And again, there's another piece of the Talmud that explains that before we're born into this world, we are shown the light of all of reality. We're shown the entirety of the truth of what life is. And one of the understandings in that piece is to know that before we come into this world, we actually see the entire spectrum. And so, on a certain level, whether or not you've lived it or you've just seen it or there's some deeper experience to all the different points along the way, deja vu is the experience of touching that place where you've been there before, either in thought or in space, right? Because there's a part of you that has already seen or experienced it on another plane, and now it's actually showing up for you in real time. And so there's a recognition, a resonance of like, oh, I know this, or I know you. We have it often not just with people or events, but often it'll be like you're learning an idea and it resonates as true, like you already knew it, even if you've never heard it before. You're like, but I knew that. That truth is not learned, truth is recognized, right? You recognize the truth that's there. That happens in our day-to-day life as well. And I think deja vu is one of those reflective experiences. You might have even had it in a dream. You might have dreamed it weeks before, months before, years before, because again, in the dream state, you're also connected to the world that's beyond the temporal plane. And so you can touch different elements that exist.